has walloped Old Town Spring Hill pretty good in terms of the historical structures that we have. A lot of people, I think, are under the perception that, we've torn everything down and given everything away, and it's really not that. What you see in Old Town Spring Hill especially is a sign of the resilience of this community to rebuild after the tornado and to continue to be the community that we are. So,
I don't know much about what happened in Spring Hill except that we did see where that hotel was torn down. It came through Newtown. It tore down that first little church we had over there. It destroyed it. It took the hood out of 49 Ford. And my husband found it a few days later over in Buck Wiley's field. That was across Duplex Road. Did a little damage to our roof, and the Red Cross came through. I remember they gave us blankets and things like that. When we went outside, there was a lot of debris everywhere, but nobody really got hurt over there except my cousin on Duplex Road. His house was uplifted from the foundation, and he said it spin, but anyway, he fell out the door, but they weren't hurt. It did a little damage. It was scary, but I was asleep, and my husband kept hollering, Margaret, come help me hold the door, come help me hold the door. And when I went in there, living room, we were in a little 3-room house, so I went in the living room and he was scotching, trying to hold the door, and the wind was blowing him back, and he was pushing forward, because he was afraid that the wind would get in the stove, because we kept fire going all night, and blow it over and the house catch on fire. But it was kind of funny because I made fun of him later. He would slide back and he'd push up. Yeah, that's about all I know about it.
Any other comments about the tornado or what difference it made or anything like that? Got a quick question here. This is about alcohol. Wants to know, was the community dry at the time? And did that make any difference?
Really saw the alcohol when this was election time. They would bring it up and pass it out to the different ones, and as I said, my brother was right there in the middle. He got his share. But that's when we saw the alcohol. But as I was growing up, a lot of it went up under the table. And there was people who sold it that you would never, in this day and time, think that they did. But we had a good time over in Newtown. We really did. Margaret and I tried to run a restaurant, didn't know what we were doing. And we had a tree to fall on the bedroom where my sister and I, and what saved us, we had it upstairs, and it knocked the lumber down on top of us, but it didn't hurt us. And I guess that's why I'm so afraid of tornadoes now. I can't get far enough from them. But
on the subject of alcohol, there was a referendum about bringing alcohol into Spring Hill, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the year, but I pulled this newspaper article a couple weeks ago. There was a 75% voter turnout. Now, whether it was the alcohol issues or whether it was a turnout, because turnout in Spring Hill was traditionally pretty high. You knew the people who were running for office, right? So you were going to get your vote in. To give you a comparison, with roughly 65, 70,000 people, 40,000 registered voters, we had 3,000 turn out for the last mayoral election. So maybe we need to see if we want to take the town dry again.
I think the referendum was like in 81, because I turned 18 that year.
And what are you admitting to?
I'm just saying, the principal made sure I signed up to vote, so I could vote the right way.
I think that's about right. I think that's what I remember.
It was 1981 before we could get It wasn't his story. It wasn't his kind of story.
Well, and there's a story, my grandparents lived up by Early's and they were pretty much teetotalers for the most part. And I opened a cabinet one day, one summer, and there's a bottle of bourbon in there. And I'm thinking, you've been telling me not to drink my entire life, like, what is this doing here? My grandfather's probably in his 90s at the time, and, I said, Granddaddy, you said that your daddy said you were a fool to drink. He said, no, my daddy said you were a fool to drink as a young man and a fool not to drink as an old man. And then he said, that bourbon actually was Dr. Woodard's. Because when the doctor would go out of the county, he would stop and get liquor as a painkiller, and then he'd drop it right back off when he came back in town. So that was his excuse for having liquor in the corner cabinet in the breakfast room, was he was keeping it from Dr. Woodard.
What is this kitchen post?
It's where there's a garden center now.
Yeah.
It was a white honky tonk.
Yeah.
Back
And I think you could go to the back door, I don't know, but I'm not saying from personal experience, but I think you could go to the back door and.
Oh, there was a secret knock, apparently. You could knock a certain way and they would deliver alcohol to you. So when you go buy flowers at the garden center, think about the hitching post. I was told, driving past the hitching post coming into town, to turn my head the other way. Didn't do a whole lot of good, but.
And you'll remember they're all in the book.
Well, one night during the horse show, Spring Hill had a big horse show at times, the Lions Club. Well, we had the concession and we ran out of change. So I had to go to the hitching post one night about 11 o'clock to get change. So I knew Lucille. So I went in and I went straight to the boss. And I said, I need some change. So I got my change and I got out of there.
Well, I think we need to, what's the time like? We could probably go on a
Let's
good
take
while
a
here.
couple more questions and then we'll wrap.
20 more minutes.
Okay,
I'd like to ask one more question. When we, I think we're in the third grade, 51, 52, right in there, we had a terrible blizzard
Oh, yeah.
here.
That's
and we-
1950.
no,
Ice storm
51. 51. We were out of school 2 weeks. I remember, no electricity. And my granny cooked on top of the coal stove. And we huddled around it. And it was a tough time, but didn't have to go to school and made it just fine. But you had to break water for the animals and everything. It was really rough. Anybody else have memories of the ice storm?
My grandmother died in Hornwall that night, and it was almost impossible to get down there. It took us all day. My uncle and cousin came after us in Franklin, and it took them half the day to get there and took us half the day to get back. And there was no communication except the highway patrol. And she was brought to the house because the ground was so hard and deep, they couldn't dig a grave. And it was about a week before we could bury her.
How would they pick up the milk in weather like that?
They did.
Good answer.
They poured it out.
We're down the way.
Up by hand. Had milk by hand. Yeah, you had no electricity, but we had another spell like that about,
63.
That's right.
Had a big storm, I mean snowstorm. 51 was an ice storm.
right.
Blizzard.
63 was snow. But it was bad.
I got a question about the Red Raider Grill. Anybody know anything about that? What was the Red Raider Grill?
Red Raider Grill was up in the area where the well is. Yeah.
By the Esso station. The way I remember it.
It's
No, it wasn't.
Yeah,
It's
where
for
the
Wales.
Yeah.
it was on
Right, and it was that,
it was north of the Esso station.
it was that Ditto. That was the Esso station.
Jackson Hardware, that's where Miss Green used to be.
Speaking of water or towers,
How many of you heard about our water issues today? How many of you know the city's facing water resource issues, right? Everybody hands go up. Guess what? It's been a pretty consistent issue for this town.
talk about water. We had a shortage at one time, I understand. We had a drought at one time. We used to get our water out of the,
Sorry, you're interfering.
okay,
There was a time when Spring Hill had a water problem, no doubt. And I remember that, I think it was the National Guard that brought in a tanker that was filled with water, and you could take your buckets or whatever and go up and get water. And in most of the homes along Main Street, there was, in the backyard was a hand dug well that, people used at one time. But to give you a water deal, when we moved from the farm to Spring Hill, that was in January of 1948. I've got most all the canceled checks that my dad ever had written in his life. This is reading history. And I've got one here dated February the 9th of 1948 to the city of Spring Hill for my water bill. And guess what the water bill was for that 1 month in January? And it was non-meter. It was $1.75.
Again, over in Newtown, where I was raised, we got water from a spring. And maybe about a half a mile from where we live. And that's where most people got their water. And Mary's grandfather would go down and dig it out every spring, I believe it was. And so then some people had wells. They had their own private well. And at one point, the city came over and dug a well that was closer to our house. Because nobody had running water in Newtown. I mean, we came up, we didn't know we were poor. We were poor, dirt poor, but we didn't know it, because that's all we knew was what we knew, you know.
She wanted me to talk about water at the creamery. Where we are is, on Sugar Ridge Road, there's a rock spring house there, or dairy. It has a hand dug well out behind it. They cool the milk. The water was channeled into that building with channels inside the building. Milk cans were set down in it. It was cooled that way. We didn't have any electricity at that point, but they used steam to separate and churn the milk. They carried the butter over to the railroad track and shipped it to Columbia or Franklin on the train. And then I guess they used the skim to feed the hogs and so forth. But we had a spring that fed the house, and we were lucky. We had good water. And I know a lot of people around Spring Hill didn't, still don't.
anybody else have any water memories?
The farmhouse there on Hurt Road, didn't have a well. It had a cistern. And, that was the system for a lot of the area farmhouses, I think. If you can imagine something like a silo, but down in the ground, lined with rock and brick, and then capped over with a pump that you do like this and bring water up with little cups come out the spout. How did it get water in it? When it would commence, as my granny would say, raining, when it would commence raining, you let the rain rinse the roof off for a little while, and then you put the spout of the gutter system into the pipe, and it would fill up the cistern. And and it was a soft water because it was rainwater. It was really nice, you know, to bathe in those old galvanized tubs we had back then, come out feeling pretty soft. But I remember Papa and Granny had it cleaned out one time, and Bill is the one that got down in that well, and he told all kinds of horrific stories about frogs and things he encountered down there. He didn't want to do it again.
We have a couple of questions about some buildings in Spring Hill. In particular, this old white building, this unoccupied building, one reference is north of Dr. Garner's.
Little white building just south of the empty lot on the west side of the McKissack house.
Yeah.
In fact, it's actually
Picture of it on the back
was our
wall.
second library, believe it or not. It has the old drugstore sign in the front.
What was it built as?
It was a drugstore.
Drugstore, which is why that sign is up, but it's also been a music shop store and a bus stop and a hardware store. It's been a little bit of everything.
And one of the most notable buildings near, I guess we can say downtown Spring Hill, is simply called the Purple House. What in the world is
I
going
knew
on?
we wouldn't escape a session. The Purple House was built by the same family who owns the brick house just to the south of it, who owned and built. It's fondly referred to as the Purple House because there was a little dispute with the city many years ago. It is privately held. It is slowly being worked on, especially if you look at it from the backside. It's actually, the house is not as old as most people think it is. I believe it was built in the 1920s. I know it is the Langley House, the Martin Langley House. Some other folks are agreeing to that, so that's a little bit of history on that house. You may notice most of the commercial businesses in Spring Hill now, south of Macklemore, are in prior residences. So most of those structures have an offset to the street because it was their front yard. The main commercial district in Spring Hill was around Macklemore Depot Street, and those buildings sit right on the road because that was the commercial district. And then you went north, and you see the McKissack House and the Purple House, and once again you have those setbacks. Spring Hill was effectively, I don't know what year this changed, well, I know it's changed now, but effectively for many, many years, Spring Hill was 1 square mile. It is now close to 32. Someone said up here, I think it was Ann, when you think about Saturn, for some of you who are newer, it seems like Saturn and GM have been here forever. For many of us, and I'll include myself in this, it's been a really rapid pace of change. In 40 years, that's 4 generations. And that's part of why we wanted to do this panel.
I've got a copy of the 1950 census that was done here in Spring Hill. And if my calculation is right, there was 541 people here in 1950. And of that, about 120 something were associated with the children's home that was here. Either the people that were house parents or whatever. So roughly in 1950, there's about 400 people here. So look how much has changed in X number of years.
22, 23, 20, 22, and 23, it was 51,319 to 53,585. From 1950 to 540.
Anybody know when it was when Saturn, just before Saturn came? And I thought I had heard around 3,000.
I don't think it was that big. I think it was probably about 1,200, maybe 1,500.
According to the 1980 census, 989.
That also raises an interesting question that nobody's asked it, so I'm gonna insert myself. Utilities. Several years ago, the city wanted to rename the road in front of the elementary school. And they wanted to change the name from Toon Proutis to Sharon Cantrell. Sharon Cantrell was an esteemed educator, very worthy of that cause. And when you talk about changing the name of other esteemed citizens, it becomes controversial. R.B. Toon was mayor in this community He was somewhat known, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but he would climb up into the old water tower that used to be on Macklemore and paint it when it would get dry in the summertime. Gus Proutis may have been who you were thinking about that took the bus. He was also a mayor, and he raised more Boy Scouts in this town than a multi-generation, sort of like Grudge Chairs, raised students. Gus Proutis was responsible for buying the land where the water plant is out on Kedron. That was in the mid-1970s, not that long ago. Gus Proutis was responsible for putting streetlights on Main Street. And Gus Proutis was also responsible, I believe, and correct me, for implementing a garbage pickup, which I understand was a little controversial, because prior to that, we would burn our garbage in big barrels. And then we had to pay for garbage pickup. And how much did we have to pay? Do you remember?
No.
It's kind of a big deal when you can burn your own garbage, and then you have to pay to have it taken away. But that was in the 70s as well, so again, not that far back.
And how frequently did the new garbage pickup come around?
Tom and I talked about this when we were prepping for this. It seems to me that John Proutis said that regular garbage pickup was maybe like once a month. It wasn't as regular as we're used to, and in between, and there was no recycling, right? You burned everything, you wind up with tin cans in the bottom of the big barrel. So a lot of the services that we take for granted, some folks take for granted, and a lot of the services that many people expect as a regular are actually sort of fairly new, although that probably dates me a lot. Anybody else remember about garbage pickup, Richard?
No.
I remember burning in the barrel in the garden.
Yeah, and she grew up on Depot Street, so it's right in town.
Richard actually made a reference to the children's home. That's been a major feature of Spring Hill for a long time. How did this affect this community? How did its presence make a difference? And you already mentioned they have a separate talk about the census category as those people. What else? What else about the children's home? Anybody?
The children's home came to Spring Hill in 1934, I think.
According to the history of this, on the Spring Hill Elementary website.
But before that, it was the Branham and Hughes Military Academy. Spring Hill's also been, at least from what I can read and from the way I was raised, it's been a bit unique in the community's emphasis on education. At some point in the late 1800s, there were 6 schools in that community of 400 or 500 people. And so part of that population was the students that would come, particularly from Nashville, to get to the country air in Spring Hill. There were 2 African-American schools. In fact, I believe there were more African-American schools in Murray County than there were in Williamson County. I don't know what that emphasis was about, but you had Branham and Hughes for a long time. You had the Male Institute, the Female Institute, Beechcroft School for Girls, which was where Mom and Me is now. All of those schools may have lasted 10 to 20 years, and then the children's home came in the 30s. My mom would tell the story. My mom was born in 31, and she would tell the story that there were the home kids and the town kids, and there really wasn't a distinction. A lot of the home kids were mainstreamed into Spring Hill School. The president of her class was a young man from the children's home. Some of the folks we've interviewed who lived at the children's home will tell you that the community homes invited them home for Sunday dinner and included them in their homes. It was a large part of the population, but it wasn't necessarily a delineated part of the population. They were just a part of the community. Richard, would you have anything different to add?
I lived a block from them, and I went to school with them. I go over there and play with them, and I even went to camp with them. And a lot of times they would go to a circus in Nashville or whatever. I went to church with them, and they would invite me. I felt like I was one of the orphans. And, they had a dairy there there was a Guernsey herd that they had more boys than they had cows, and they would put a boy on each side of the cow to milk the cow. And there were some great kids that come out of that Arkansas.
They also own most of the land where we are now. Is that right, Sam? Yeah. And there is, if you look at Kedron and Main Street, there's a large culvert that goes under the road. The story that I've heard, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, was that they would march cattle under the road to get it back and forth between pastures. And recognizing the children's home then was very different to what it is now. The children's home then was also a home for kids whose parents may have been under financial hardship. It wasn't necessarily some of the kids didn't face some of the challenges that the kids in the children's home now face. So it was a different environment.
And they worked on the farm and did hay and did everything farms have to do. Mr. Eastep was ahead of the farms, and he lived where the elementary school is now in a big two-story white house.
That's right.
And, the children all worked and pitched in.
Raised most of their own food, as a lot of people here did. I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard people say, whatever the color of your skin, heard people say, we didn't know we were poor, Margaret. We had food, we had neighbors, we had friends, we had church. It's just the way it was. And if somebody needed help getting a barn up or getting a crop in, then everybody pitched in to get it done. Other questions, Tom?
Are there other questions from the, okay, we got one back here.
Yeah, I'm curious, because my dad worked there, about the thoughts or impact of the experiment station on the community.
Come on.
What was the question?
The impact of the experiment station on the community, agriculture station.
We have a young fella here whose dad worked for the experiment station. That's who it is back there.
That was my question.
Yeah, so how does it affect the community having it here?
The experiment station, of course, originally the first one was where Murray County Hospital and Murray County Fair is, and they moved to the current location, early 50s? But, the experiment station was a place where any of the high school boys that wanted a summer job worked. They had a dairy herd, they had tobacco, they had row crops, beef herd, and it was, most everybody that worked there was a part of the community. Their children were raised in the schools and in the community. And, it's evolved to mostly a crop and beef cattle operation now, but it was a pretty important part of the agricultural place. Anybody could go and ask questions and get answers to most any of the issues that they were having with their crops or cattle.
And very much its own community as well.
One thing a lot of people aren't aware of is that the experiment station helped clone one of the first cows in the United States. And it was a Jersey cow, which I think is great because Pat's Farm was one of the first to import Jersey cows into the U.S.
Okay, we could spend a lot of time asking more questions. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank our panel for their if we did not sing happy birthday to Miss Margaret. So I'm not going to start us. Bridget, you want to lead us off to your mom? I do. Far better than me. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Margaret. Happy birthday to you. Capacity to celebrate her birthday all month. I like that tradition. I've also gotten couple questions in the back, and is Laura Fergal still here? Okay, can you stand up and tell us about your, I think she's disappeared. No, oh, is she? Laura, can you stand up and tell us about the Old Stone Creamery? I was asking about farm produce, where people can buy farm produce.
So I'm Laura Campbell Purtle. That's my daddy. And that's one of my former bus drivers, my neighbors. So I'm very lucky to have been raised by all the fine folks up front. So as my dad said, we have been farming here. I'm a 6th generation farmer with my dad. And my sister and I have a store out on Sugar Ridge just past the railroad tracks. And so we bottle some of the milk that he was talking about from the old stone creamery that's on the place that has water running through it. And when he was talking about leaving the milk jugs in the creek, we have beef from our farm and we have milk from our farm. And we would love for you to stop by and join us and see some of the other local farmers that bring their stuff to our store as well.
Hey, plus. Yes, that's Campbell. All right, Campbell, do you have any questions?
Pat, is this, the young lady whose steer came down off of Sugar Ridge and, made it all the way down Hurt Road about 3 or 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, and the police, that steer had been on Facebook during the night, and the Spring Hill
The
place.
Spring Hill Police Department and Spring Hill Fire Department have a great sense of humor if you follow their pages on Facebook. And this post popped up and it showed, the post was basically from the police said, this is a really, really big dog and it doesn't appear to belong here. But it's very polite, it stays on the sidewalk. It's a steer. So those of us out west who have cattle are going, okay, is it mine? Does it belong to Pat? And I think it's over on the east side of 31. There's no way that it's from the west side of town. Next thing I know, Danny has rescued the steer. And then the next picture I see is of the Campbell trailer picking the steer up to bring him home. Apparently he's been on some adventures and apparently been in the field by the hitching post. No one thought to notice or follow him until after the fact they went, oh, I saw him there. Danny was the rescuer.
Wonder if we could have just one more minute to talk about Dr. Woodard. No one's mentioned Dr. Woodard and stories of Dr. Woodard. Anybody got some stories?
Oh, Richard does.
Dr. Woodard made house calls out in the country and whatever, and when he was going to make a trip, he'd usually try to find one of us young kids in the neighborhood to go with him. And it took me a while to figure that out. But he, of course, back then, most every farm had a gate on it, and he wanted a kid to come along and open the gate for him. I'll give you a Dr. Woodard story. I delivered the papers in this town when I was 12 years old. And I learned, I've been in every home in Spring Hill because of being a paper boy. And I learned the people in Spring Hill. I knew every man, woman, and child and their dog. Now, the dog hated the paper boy riding a bicycle and throwing papers on the front porch. And this was in the wintertime, and I was delivering papers to Dr. Woodard's house there across from Florist. And I threw the paper on Dr. Woodard's side porch, and I had to go around behind his house because Roy Pruitt lived in the little yellow house behind it, and he had a fenced-in fence around his yard. But he had this big old mixed dog back there that always met me back there. I went back there this night, it was about dark, and the gate was open. And I said, oh me, I'm in trouble. So I just threw the paper and took off running, and that dog caught me by the fence leg and threw me down. And I had my hand up stuck like this, and I have a scar in my hand right there where that dog bit me. And Dr. Woodard heard all the commotion and came out there and run that dog off me. And that dog would eat me up. But Dr. Woodard, if you went to him after he treated you or whatever, he made you a little airplane out of tongue compressors. And gave you a nickel or a dime and told you to go up to Dr. Tom Kennard's and get you an ice cream cone.
Dr. Woodard also told his grandson, who was a practicing dentist in Columbia, that he was concerned that medicine was becoming more science than it was art. Dr. Woodard knew a lot of his people in his community, and he knew the families, and he knew your jobs, and you could go in and he could pretty much diagnose you without running a bunch of imaging and x-ray tests, right? He knew the art of it, and he was really concerned that medicine was becoming so scientific that it would lose that piece of it. I think about that a lot, especially as I get older and have to go through a bunch of that.
Yes, when Bobby had that appendicitis, he got through milking and his daddy took him to Dr. Woodard, and Dr. Woodard told him he had appendicitis, go to the hospital. Just like that.
And we delivered a lot of babies, over in the black community too. I think most of Mary's siblings were delivered. on the side of his house.
Which was the yellow house, right? Kind of across from Tri-State.
Yeah, it's about covered with foliage now, you can't hardly see it, still there.
All right, we've run over. Thank you all very much. I'd like to ask the panel to remain so we can grab a picture of you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Tom.